Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned because it's the last day of the month, which means tomorrow is May, which means the mayhem begins tomorrow. Yes, Horror Mayhem is arriving on the scene tomorrow, and I've really looked forward to this event. This event, created by the Bookish Bryants, all about reading horror. Short horror fiction is what this event focuses on for the most part. And it has a bunch of awesome co-hosts this year. I'll link them all down below. And I got piles of books ready. I've got piles of books ready. When I first announced or did my announcement for Horror Mayhem, I showed some of the books I intended on reading. But then, there's all kinds of books I intend on reading as far as horror goes. So I've got an extended pile or couple piles of possibilities. And I don't know exactly what I'm going to read out of these books, but it's going to be one of these books. Or it's going to be a few of these books. I'll read a few of them. And like I said, I'm not sure exactly which ones. Well, there's one I know I'm going to read. But out of these books, if you see any books that you think you definitely should read that book, let me know. Let me know. Leave it down in the comments. Also, since this is an event all about reading shorter horror fiction, I'm going to flash up some of my favorite anthologies, my favorite horror anthologies. This program's very exciting. Isn't this full of excitement today, Roger? Roger's, he's speechless with excitement. So yes, I'm going to show you some of my favorite horror anthologies, just in case you wanted to read some short horror fiction. Hey, here are some books you could read. I'm all about the old stuff on account of me being old. I'm not quite as old as Roger. Roger's really old, but I like the old stuff. So I did a whole video on this book. I'll just flash it up for a second. This is Great Tales of Terror and the Supernatural. This is available from Modern Library. This is Modern Library. Great Tales of Terror and the Supernatural. This is still available, only it's got a different cover. This is the first edition from 1944. But there's a newer edition that you can order from eBay or whatever. And it is a really big book. They called it a giant, and they weren't kidding. This is over 1,000 pages of classic horror. And there's some great stuff in here. Great Tales of Terror and the Supernatural. This is a good one. Not to be confused with Masterpieces of Terror and the Supernatural. Those were just great tales, but these are masterpieces. This is from Marvin Kaye, who did a bunch of anthologies of this sort. This one is from the 80s. This one's published by Barnes & Noble. I don't remember who published it the first time. But yeah, this is from 1985 from Marvin Kaye. So, Masterpieces of Terror and the Supernatural. There's some good stuff in here. Again, another fairly large anthology, 600 and something pages. Probably one of the greatest anthologies of all time in horror fiction, though, is this one. This is The Dark Descent. The Dark Descent, this is edited by David G. Hartwell, who's edited a whole bunch of anthologies. And The Dark Descent, this is one I've been meaning to get back to, well, since I've started my channel. It's another great big giant book, over 1,000 pages, and it's awesome. This kind of traces the history of horror fiction up into the 1980s. This was published in the 80s as well. When was this published? 1987. So, yeah, this is an awesome book. You know what's surprisingly a good book? Is this. I got this from Barnes & Noble. This is one of their Barnes & Noble fancy pants books with a gaudy cover like Barnes & Noble likes to do. But the contents of this volume are surprisingly good. This is called Classic Horror Stories, very imaginative title. But it's really, really great. There are so many awesome stories in here from all of the great horror writers. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, Sheridan Le Fanu, Ambrose Bierce, Henry James, Bram Stoker, Guy de Maupassant, Robert Louis Stevenson. And who else is in here? Marion Crawford, Edith Wharton, M.R. James, Arthur Machen, W.W. Jacobs with The Monkey's Paw, of course, Algernon Blackwood, H.P. Lovecraft. It's got everybody in here. If it has one weakness, is that all of these stories are stories that are frequently anthologized. But if you just want one volume that has all of those classic horror stories that you absolutely need to read from the authors you absolutely need to read that are classic horror authors, this is the book. This one's pretty good. Of course, if you want to get super classy, there is the Library of America with their 2-volume set, American Fantastic Tales. You know, Library of America is so damn fancy, so classy, that they can't bring themselves to put horror in the title of one of their sets. So we've got American Fantastic. They're fantastic. They're fantastic. You know, they're horror stories in 2-volume set, edited by Peter Straub. Excellent, excellent books. But one of the most impressive, at least from the perspective of size, is this one. This is The Weird. This is The Weird. This was published back in 2011. This is edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. This thing is gigantic. So this is one of those big, gigantic anthologies that are double columned, so they're even more gigantic than they look at first glance. This one is 1,100 pages long, and this has so much stuff in it. The Weird. So yeah, a compendium of strange and dark stories. It's gigantic. Again, traces the weird story from the very beginning up through, well, 2011 when this was published. And this is a great anthology. I highly recommend it. Still can get it, still available, The Weird. So those are some anthologies you might want to check out because, you know, all of those are great and they have a bunch of great stuff in it if you're interested in reading short fiction for Horror Mayhem. As I said, I had a horror TBR, but I've expanded it. I just finished, actually, this book, Skeleton Crew by Stephen King. I was thinking this was going to take me into Horror Mayhem, but I actually finished it before Horror Mayhem. This is good. Not great, but it's good. There are some great stories in here, though. I'll talk about this in my weekend reading report. But I finished that too soon for Horror Mayhem. So I moved right on to The Beetle by Richard Marsh, which is Roger's selection for his cheap old book club this month. This is a classic horror story, which came out the same year Dracula did, and it outsold Dracula for a while, even though it's not as good as Dracula. It does have a pretty creepy monster in it, and some other strange characters. I forgot how many strange characters were in this book by Richard Marsh. The Beetle. So I'm starting off with this. I'm starting off with The Beetle. But then I'm going to be moving on to some other stuff. And the only one I know for absolute sure that I'm going to read is this one. This is The Macabre Reader by Donald A. Wollheim. The Macabre Reader. I know I'm going to move right onto this as soon as I'm done with The Beetle. This is a classic collection of horror stories, which was published. It was in the 50s, right? Yeah, 1959. So classic horror here with a great cover, published by Ace. Cost 35 cents back in the day. So this for sure, I know I'm going to be reading. And I'm probably going to be moving on to the sequel, More Macabre, from Donald A. Wollheim. This is the second volume of his macabre books. Don't think he ever made a third, unfortunately. But these are cool, and they've got great covers, and they've got some awesome stories inside. So I'm certainly going to read at least the first one and probably the next one. But there are so many other books that I want to read. This is my problem. There are always so many other books I want to read. I like this one, Flowers from the Moon and Other Lunacies by Robert Bloch. This is one I think I really want to read. Classic horror stories from Robert Bloch. This is some of his earliest stuff, I believe. This one was published by Arkham House. Have a couple other Arkham House volumes, Alone with the Horror, Ramsey Campbell. Will I get to this year? I've been putting this off for a year or two. Clark Ashton Smith, A Rendezvous and Averoigne. I actually don't know how to pronounce this word. I don't even know if that's a real word, but I do need to get to this, and I've been intending to read this forever. Will this be the horror mayhem when I read it? I don't know. I also got this slim little collection, Weird Tales. This is edited by Leo Margulies. Weird Tales, and it's very wee, so it would be a good one to read. Full of short stories. Weird Tales, the greatest horror pulp magazine of all time. They publish some great horror and fantasy stuff, including all of the big ones. Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, and of course, H.P. Lovecraft. And this is just a magnificent cover. So Shadows with Eyes by Fritz Leiber. I've been wanting to get to this one forever. Here's another Marvin Kaye. This is Fiends and Creatures. I've had this hanging out. And this is not new anymore, but this is the 25th anniversary of the best new horror, so I might pick this up. You know, this looks really cool. There were several of these. And yeah, this is the first one. Best new horror. At least it was new over 25 years ago. And then I've got some collections from authors. Another one that's been hanging out, Night Ride by Charles Beaumont. Night Ride and Other Journeys. This is a fantastic author who wrote some classic Twilight Zone episodes and just some great, great books. Died too young, but he did leave us some great stuff. So I've been intending to read this. I just haven't had time to do it. Now, this is another book that I've been intending to read and haven't gotten to yet. This is Thomas Ligotti, Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe. And I've had this hanging out for quite some time. The only times I've ever read Ligotti is when he's shown up in an anthology I've been reading. So I have read Ligotti, but I haven't read a lot of Ligotti. So there you go. Grimscribe and Songs of a Dead Dreamer. Should I actually pick this up this year for Horror Mayhem? I might. This might be the year that I do it. We'll see. Now this one is interesting. This is The Dark Domain by Stefan Grabinski, translated by Miroslav Lipinski. So this is translated horror. We have a bingo card, and it has a bunch of different topics on there, and one is translated horror. So if I read this, I'll be able to check that off. I would show you the bingo card, but I'm filming this before work, and I don't have time to edit the video. Next time I will, but this would work for that. The Dark Domain. And Stefan Grabinski is an author I've heard a lot about, and I've heard he's really good, and I've had this book for a while, so I should get to it. Here's another Ramsey Campbell collection. This is Just Behind You by Ramsey Campbell. This is a newer collection. Well, it's a few years old now, but it's another book I want to get to, but I don't know that I actually will. I'll probably get to that other Ramsey Campbell book. I might reread this book. I might. This is T.E.D. Klein's Dark Gods, which is a collection of 4 novellas, which is one of my favorite books. This is just a dynamite set of novellas. He only wrote a few books, but they tend to be of high quality, his stuff. I saw a review of this from Criminale a few months back, and he had a different opinion of it than I did. He liked it, but like this, there are 4 novellas, and the 2 that he liked the most are different than the ones I liked the most. So I would like to reread this and just see what I think of it. It has been a while since I've read this, but I remember it being fantastic. So I might revisit this. I might. I don't know. Here's a book I've had hanging out for a while. This is a collection from Barry Lee DeJesus, Black City Skyline and Darker Horizons. This has a foreword by T.E.D. Klein. And this was sent to me by Hippocampus Press. And I never picked it up and read it. So I should have, since they sent me the book. But I haven't read it yet. And like I said, I've never read Barry Lee DeJesus, so I don't know much about his fiction. But I've had this sitting around. I know it's horror, so I should read it. I should read that book. Will I? I don't know if I'll have time. I don't know if that's one of the choices I'll make, but you let me know. Now, there are some novels that I've been intending to read for a while. Some of them are a little bit too long. I think 250 pages is the cutoff for Horror Mayhem. But, you know, like we follow those rules. It's Mayhem after all. But this one isn't. This one is Cold Skin by Albert Sanchez Pinol. And this is supposed to be a really creepy novel. I've had this for, what, a year or two now? I don't even remember. It was recommended to me by a viewer. So will I read this? I don't know. This one is so tiny, it'll fit right in. This is Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. The Case Against Satan. This is a wee little book. And I read one book from Ray Russell and I really enjoyed it. And so it's a classic. It's an official classic. It's in the Penguin Classics. So should I read this? Let me know. Maybe I will. This is one I'm really leaning to. This is Jack Ketchum's Off Season, which I've had for a long time. All of these books I've had for a long time, but this one was sent to me by Juan over at Plagued by Visions. Magnificent channel and a pretty good friend, Juan. He sent me this awesome book. He actually sent me a few Jack Ketchum books. And I've been too terrified to read them. But this, I believe, is Ketchum's first book off season. And I might read this. I'm kind of leaning towards this one. But let me know. Let me know if I should read that. Or should I read The Transition of Titus Crow from Brian Lumley? I really like Brian Lumley a lot. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'll pick this one up this month or not. Who knows? I might. And there is Dagon from Fred Chappell, which I've mentioned before. I really want to read, but I haven't read it. So maybe I'll read that. Now, there are a couple, I love the comics and the graphic novels. I am going to be reading The Haunt of Fear this month. I'll probably be starting to read this weekend. The Haunt of Fear from EC Comics, the greatest comic book company of all time. And this is from the EC Archives series of books, where they reprint all of these classic horror comics. And this is the first volume from The Haunt of Fear. And look, I think one of your relatives is here, Roger, on this cover. So I'll get to that. But I'm also definitely going to be reading this. This is Dracula. This is the first ever Dracula graphic novel. And it was published originally in paperback, in mass market paperback, but it's reprinted in this. And it looks awesome, this book. And the artist on this, who did the art? It's illustrated by Al McWilliams. Adapted, the story is by Otto Binder, Russ Jones, and Craig Tennis. So a lot of people worked on this. But it looks really cool. And so I'm definitely going to be reading this. The original Dracula graphic novel reprinted in this little hardcover. So I'll read this one for sure. A lot of the other ones are kind of up in the air. So, help me out. Any of those you think I should definitely read? Let me know. Man, it's been 20 minutes. I should probably go to work. I got to drink some coffee too. I need some coffee. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.